Welcome. I'm Tilly Strauss, painter from Northeast New York, and a proud founding member of the Inspiration Art Group International, the Joy, Hope, Creativity group of women. I practice my art in a way of being present and showing up. And my passion for art history is a family curse, really. I have a full family of artists, writers, curators, archivists, and that's what we love to do, is read and study and write letters and share things. I also am the oldest of a group of sisters and one half brother. And when I was a kid, I played a lot at teaching school. But anyway, in recently, I've been in Miami and in Zermatt, Switzerland, teaching teenagers art and art history. And I kind of became frustrated with the way the narrative is told and what's been omitted. And actually, honestly, what I wasn't taught. And I was an art history major in Colorado. So I returned to the family farm in New York from Miami and Zermatt just before COVID, and I started an artist's project illustrating an art history novel. And so this project is part of that. I also work as a town clerk, and I'm fascinated with what people share with me. And when they come in, and everybody's an expert in something. So I'm hoping that somebody out there listening maybe would have some comments about what we talk about tonight and share it in the chat, and we can address it at the end. If you're on YouTube, I think you have to register on YouTube to be able to leave a comment. And but I would love to know what you know. You probably know some things, so thank you. What I want to present is the first of a 10-month plan where every month I'm going to share about an artist, a female artist who was famous and influential in her day, but since her death has kind of been overlooked, forgotten, even intentionally erased. There's lots of women artists in our past history, but we just rarely hear about them. A lot of paintings and sculptures have been attributed wrongly. And of course, women have always had obstacles until recently. I mean, we have a lot easier now, and thanks to some of these women I want to share with you about. But there are obstacles. They couldn't attend academies. They couldn't have assistants. They didn't have access to studios or studies. And in fact, 100 years ago, a woman couldn't get on a ladder. You know, you could be arrested for doing that and your whole future ruined if you showed your ankles. So grand historical monuments and ceiling paintings were really out of reach for this. The historians ignored a lot of these women because of lack of written contracts and civic engagement in the art world. So January 18th, the Washington Post had an article, and it said, Michelangelo praised her, Van Dyck painted her, we're the fools who forgot her. And what they were talking about is Sofonisba Anguissola. She was born in Cremona, about 50 miles southeast of Milan, if you know that area, and she lived to be 93. During her life, she traveled to Rome. She worked in the Spanish royal courts. Later in life, she fell in love, and she died a wealthy, happy woman in Palermo, Sicily. Now, throughout time, women have been celebrated for their virtue and their beauty, and the pressure has been to limit their ambition to motherhood and marriage. Sofonisba kind of bent those rules. In this painting of her, the self-portrait, it's signed in the book right where her thumb is. It says 1554, and it's got Sofonisba Anguissola, and it says Virgo, which means virgin. When she rarely signed her pieces, but when she signed her pieces, she always put the virgin thing. And the reason she did that was she had to guard her accessibility, her reputation, so she could have access to influential patrons. She's painted here in a black outfit, which is it was a color reserved pretty much for men or for old widows. She has a high collar, to sort of to keep her chastity and virtue, and just a little bit of lace to signify her nobility. But I think Sofonisba here, she didn't want to portray herself frivolous or an object as a subject of the male gaze. She wanted to be professional. And this reminds me of a lot of artists actually today who have taken sort of branded themselves with a look, George O'Keeffe is one who had a winter in black, I think, and in summer in white. Just a very simple costume that she did, uniform. Okay, this is actually how I got on to Sofonisba, part of a book club, and this was one of the first books we read. And Sofonisba is introduced in page 31. She's one of 25 artists in this book of women from history who specialized in self-portraits. I was shocked by how many women I didn't know. And reading through this, I got dismayed by how many I would forget, like right after I read them. Like 2 chapters back, I was like, who was that artist? What was she do? They were all meshing together. So this project, I'm really hoping will be a way for me to really learn 10 of these women artists together with you guys, we can learn together and maybe it'll stick. She is getting better known. In 1994, Cremona had a show of 971 works. Now, as far as my research went, there were only like 50 paintings we could totally assume were hers at this point. 971 works had to be some of the people she influenced. She was also copied a lot by other very influential artists. Peter Paul Rubens went to Spain to copy her stuff. And her sisters were also painters. So I'm assuming that show had a few of those. 25 years later, the Prado Museum put on a show of 2 pioneering female artists who started getting attention. And there's that book there, The Tale of 2 Women Painters. That's Sofonisba Anguissola and Lavinia Fontana. So we can hope, this was 2019, that we'll start hearing more of her again. So, she was even copied during her lifetime. Like I said, artists would come and watch her paint and make copies of her pieces for other royal patrons. She had the respect of the greatest male artists. She had the respect of the greatest art historian, the earliest art historian, really, Vasari. And kings and queens looked to her for all things in art matters. She influenced portraiture in a couple subtle ways, and one of which is emphasizing the female self-possession and maturity. She's the oldest of 7 siblings and 1 brother, kind of like me. And they all studied art because actually it was believed that it would help the women, the young girls, attract and please husbands of noble standing. But Sofonisba is actually considered the first serious artist to portray her family as a primary subject. Now, these are 2 of her sisters and her brother Asdrubale in the middle. 2 of the sisters of the other 6 girls 5 girls would go on to be painters as well. And Minerva, one became a poet. So they really, this is when I want to mention the humanist ideals of the culture. They really studied the classics. They wanted to be literate. They wanted to know all sorts of the arts, Okay, this is Sofonisba's painting of her father with her sister Minerva and Asdrubale. And the Anguissola family traced their lineage back to the liberation of Constantinople in 717. So they were a very proud family. Yet, Amilcare was actually born illegitimate, and it wasn't until later in his youth that was changed so he could inherit a title of nobility. As a result, he didn't have a lot of land. His finances were a little bit shaky, so he did various businesses such as selling books, selling medicine, and buying grain for the city of Cremona. Here he's holding his son, and I just think the composition is interesting that Sofonisba has used, where they're kind of his arms are wrapped, his shoulders turned towards Asdrubale, and Asdrubale is looking up at his father. Minerva is kind of nervously clutching her dress off to the side. But I have to tell you, he was a radical father in that he wanted his daughters to cultivate their talents to the best of their abilities. So he ensured they had a humanist education. He also believed that a humanist education would make women virtuous, and that they could, if they weren't, if it didn't lower their dowry for prospective suitors for their husbands, it would make them eligible candidates to be courtiers in royal courts. And a courtier is someone who is a companion to a king or a queen. So this portrait of her mother, Bianca Ponzone, was also painted about a year later, and she was the niece of Galeazzo Pallavicino. And it's believed they were a very wealthy family, much more wealthy than the Anguissola family. And it was believed that she probably had a humanist education herself, because she's noted as being a great beauty, but also strong and opinionated. It was through her that there were connections to the Spanish court. So Amilcare, Sofonisba's father, to support, encourage his daughters, he actually wrote letters to well-known artists and to get them to help the daughters. So in 1545, Sofonisba and her sister Elena, who later becomes a nun, they moved into the household of Bernardino Campi, kind of a famous Cremonese artist at the time who practiced in the Mannerist style. And Mannerism, you see in that on the Madonna and Child, Sofonisba's painting, in her painting, is kind of elongated forms. It's a slight move and a reaction to the classical Renaissance forms. This is 1545. So we're at the upper edge of the ideal Renaissance proportions and moving off to more exaggerated. She was encouraged in Bernardino Campi's shop to copy a lot of Parmigianino. And so there are Sofonisba paintings of Parmigianino, sorry. And also in 1549, Amilcare got her an apprenticeship with Bernardino Gatti, who was another Cremonese painter. And historians believe that Sofonisba worked on his commissions. He did some paintings in buildings on the walls, but there's no historical reference to that. So that's going to be something to dig up later. So these two paintings are very important to Sofonisba's career. And actually, there exist two letters between Amilcare and Michelangelo Buonarroti. And these paintings are these drawings are from 1554 early, but in the late 1500s or 1550s. In 1557, there's a letter from her father to Michelangelo asking if Sofonisba could borrow a painting or drawing of his that she could copy. Then in 1558, a year later, there's a letter existing that Amilcare is thanking Michelangelo for his help and support and encouragement of Sofonisba. So these were important. Okay, this is how the story goes. Michelangelo in his 80s was looking, and someone showed him this picture, this drawing of Sofonisba's sister laughing. And he admired it, but he was rumored to have said, well, it'd be much harder to draw the opposite emotion, somebody crying. So Sofonisba and her sisters start working on tormenting poor Asdrubale there, and they've got a crayfish pinching his finger. And so she sent that picture to Michelangelo, and he kept it and showed it and was very proud of it. And that's actually, it's believed that Caravaggio saw that when he was at Michelangelo's place, because about 5 years after he saw it, he does Boy Bitten by a Lizard. Anyway, Sofonisba we can't say that she studied with Michelangelo. Michelangelo really didn't have any students, but he corresponded with her through letters, advised and critiqued her work, even after she was in Spain. And he helped her develop her skills as a painter. This is, I think, one of Sofonisba's major masterpieces, the chess game. And it's in the 16th century, nobody was doing paintings of women having a good time. And the fact that it's an all-female cast is kind of fun. This is another painting supposedly that influenced Caravaggio, with the jutting elbows and table edges that come into the viewer's space. He saw this because this was a painting hung proudly in the Anguissola household. Vasari saw it, and Vasari came and wrote about it. It was on prominent display, and it was possibly used as advertising for the Anguissolas to show their daughters as possible courtiers or wives of nobility. It's definitely highlighting their education. The game of chess. The game of chess comes to Europe, and the rules all get changed right at this time in the 16th century. The game is a men's game, and it was used for entertainment and to sharpen their skills at strategy for combat. It was developed in India, and then the Persians supposedly brought it over to Europe, and it get to Italy. And in Italy, the chivalry and the whole court life and the romance got to the point that they decided that the queen had to be the most powerful piece on the board. And that's the big change that happened to chess at that time. The Europeans, the Italians changed that. And this is a comment about gender right here. Lucia, the daughter on the left, is holding a black queen in her arms. She's defeated her sister, and she's looking right at us. And the youngest sister, Europa, is holding a little pawn in her hand, and she's delightedly learning from the whole thing. So this is a piece about the queens. Who are the queens? Maybe the two daughters playing each other. On the edge of the chessboard, down low, it's carved. It says Sofonisba Anguissola, the virgin daughter of Amilcare, painted from life 3 of her sisters and the maidservant in 1555. Now, there's a lot of things, if you're unpacking this, the clothing that these girls are wearing. It's rich, it's luxurious fabrics, and it's got embroidered detail all over it, which would signify that these women, and Sofonisba herself, would be familiar with the traditional art of embroidery. The pearls around the sister on the left's neck, those were symbols of incredible wealth at that time in the 16th century. And so this is signifying how wealthy the family is, as included with the oriental rug that's under the chessboard. And the chessboard is also an inlaid wood chessboard, not your common painted board. Including the maidservant on the back. Now, Sofonisba must have loved this maidservant, because she's painted a couple times in the background of paintings, and especially the one where she's the self-portrait playing the minaret. Anyway, she serves both as a foil of age, because she's kind of a weathered face and makes the younger girls look youthful and beautiful. But she's also a symbol of the Anguissola family wealth as well, because they were able to afford a maidservant who can watch the kids and also guard their chastity and virtue, which had to be very important. And talking about chastity and virtue, they're in a walled garden, which in art history has always sort of symbolized the Virgin Mary and her impenetrable body. She's always in a walled garden. The oak tree behind Europa, the oak tree's a symbol of wisdom, yet tree iconography itself is really important whenever females are depicted in art, because women were thought to be trees that would bear good fruit, So there's a lot in here. And the atmospheric perspective on the back. Now, where Cremona was not a hilly, mountainous region at all, but this is a piece showcasing Sofonisba's skill at atmospheric perspective, where things get lighter and bluer as they go further back. And it's a Northern European trope in a way. So this is a very cool picture too. And it is a play on gender roles herself. Sofonisba is painting her teacher, painting her. And so it's First thing you think, okay, a male creator and the female subject. That's the way it always is. It's like the Pygmalion myth of the supreme creator breathing the breath of life into his painting, or possibly a master endorsing his protege's significance. But the way she's painted herself, she's more central, she's larger, she's higher up, she's looking directly at us with agency. And then there's that other hand. Now, this is not from a cleaning job or anything. This is how Sofonisba painted it. If you look under the Bernardo Campi's arm, you can see her arm going up and joining it, and actually like as if she's moving the painting herself, the hand and painting. She's saying she's painted this herself. And also the maul stick, that's a maul stick used to steady the hand. That can be seen by some as Sofonisba making a kind of a casting shade on Campi, and that he would need some steadiness. I think also it's kind of a nice barrier across her body, but it's a barrier between his hand and her body, and that sort of protects her virtue as well. But it's an interesting piece, right? So Sofonisba got a big break when she was 27. She went to Milan and she painted the Duke of Alba, who was advisor to King Philip II of Spain. And Philip II saw the painting, was so impressed, and with Sofonisba's mother's connection to the Spanish court. Cremona at that time actually was in part of the Spanish Empire. This is the height of the Spanish Empire. He invites Sofonisba to come and be lady-in-waiting to his new bride, who's 14, he's 33, her new bride, this third wife, who's coming from France. She's called Isabelle de Valois, but she was Elizabeth de Valois, and she becomes Isabel when she comes into Spain. And Sofonisba and Isabel got along great. They were very close. And this portrait Sofonisba did of Isabel there, it's a full-length portrait. It's cut off here a little bit. Isabel is painted holding a miniature portrait of Philip in her hand, which is like a public declaration of her love for him. Sofonisba is showing the fabric, the rich fabrics, the silk lining, the jewels on the crown and the neck and the girdle, and every finger, even the thumb, have rings. But down the front of the piece, those like bow patterned shapes down it, that's all made of pearls. It's a lot of pearls. And like we said, pearls are extremely rare and a symbol of wealth at this time, but they're also a symbol of fertility. After all, the pearl is born in the oyster. So this painting, the way Sofonisba puts it in, hints at all the children that she was going to bear Philip. And unfortunately, she dies in her fourth pregnancy with her second miscarriage. And she leaves these two daughters over here, Clara and Catalina. And when she dies, it's most of her court leaves and goes back to France or Italy. But King Philip asked Sofonisba to stay and help with the girls, and be their painting instructor and also advise him on matters of art. Being in the court, there's a lot of pluses and minuses to her career at this point. Her fame spread. People came and saw her and everything, but lady-in-waiting was actually a higher status than an artisan or a painter. So she didn't do that many paintings. And when she did do paintings, they were done often as demonstrations for the queen. She was the queen's painting instructor. Demonstrations for the queen, and they were given as gifts. They were nothing, so they might not even have been signed. And she was paid in gifts, there was a whole gift economy that historians have completely ignored, because it's the domestic feminine side of how the queen paid everybody. Queen Isabel never wore the same dress twice, and never. So the ladies in waiting would get her dresses, and Sofonisba would, take apart the fabrics and do something with it. But they were crafty like that. But King Philip II, he did a lot for the arts. Under his court, the arts of Spain transformed from provincial to international and modern. And Sofonisba was there. Her fame went back to Italy, and there were medals carved of her head as an artist. So it was it's how she did her career. It's interesting to think of. So the two girls, the two princesses, are on the right and the left. I wanted just to tell you a little bit about them because this is part of Sofonisba's life too. But Clara, Princess Isabel Clara, um, when she was 2, she was engaged to the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph, and when she turned 20, Rudolph said nope, he wasn't going to marry her, and so there she's in black. She's pretty much aged out of a lot of marriages. Actually, she's 20. She ends up being taking care of her father. He really trusted. She was the only one he trusted to come into his office to translate his papers. She became his real sidekick, and she nursed him the last 3 years of his life. On his deathbed, her father arranged a marriage between Clara and Albert VI, the Archduke of Austria, and together they would go on to reign the Netherlands, have a court in Brussels, stimulate the Dutch Baroque period. She became a patron to Bruegel the Younger, Peter Paul Rubens, and basically under her reign, it became the golden age of the Spanish Netherlands. The sister Catalina on the right there, that is Sofonisba did that painting when she was 15, and it's believed that was an advertisement to be sent out for possible suitors, husbands, and because it's just showing all the statuses of her wealth, and her really pale skin is a sign of Spanish nobility. Don Carlos in the middle was King Philip II's son, firstborn and only child from his first wife, who died in childbirth. And he was a difficult child. They said he suffered from epilepsy. He had uncontrollable fits. They ended up, they drilled a hole in his skull to kind of relieve pressure and tried all sorts of things. But he was a handful. And the thing is that Isabel, when she showed up at the court, she was very nice to him, and he had never had that kind of contact before, and he fell in love with his stepmother, Isabel, and Isabel's blamed for this. Things got worse at that point. There was a lot of drama, and he ends up wanting to kill his father, and the king has to lock him up. And it's just, if you want to know more about the royal family and what it was like to be a patron there, I have a zine I've made, and it covers court life, the royal patrons, what life is like as a courtier, the humanist principles of education, and the development of chess. It goes a little bit more deeper than this talk, but he... If you look up Sofonisba and you find books of fiction, they really go into this Don Carlos love triangle, Isabel, Sofonisba witnessing it, and I think it's all a little much, but it is interesting. So Sofonisba stays at the court for about 14 years, and the king is a very generous patron and decides to gift her with a husband. So she's 39, and he gives her a husband, and he gives her a big dowry. Some say, it was pretty extreme, that it must have been that way to help protect her painting career. So she goes off to Sicily with her husband, and when he dies, we don't know what she was really doing, but when her husband dies in 1579, she's wealthy enough, she gives the local church a whole altar. Then she decides to go visit her family in Cremona, and she's in Sicily, which is way down in the tip of the boot, and Cremona's way up at the top. And so as she's taking the little ship ride up the coast of Italy, she falls in love with Orazio Lomaglino, who's 15 years younger than her. They want to get married. The family is totally against it, and they try to get the Duke of Florence, one of the Medicis, to stop it, when King Philip comes to the rescue and says, no, I think this is a great idea. And he starts giving her an annual rent In exchange, she becomes his agent. He's building Escorial, this like eighth wonder of the world in Spain. It's a monastery castle complex. And Sofonisba is the one advising him, sending him artists, sending him artwork. And she's doing that kind of stuff. It's pretty cool. There's at least 12 of her portraits known right now. Of course, I'm hoping that as we talk more about Sofonisba, we will discover more about her. But I love that older one up in the top too that she does. So. This drawing of Sofonisba is we think it's about when she's 40, because it had to be, she was gifted the husband at 39, and there's no way, people have said, that the king would have allowed her to wear a hat like that. So that's how we're dating it, that she must have been in her 40s. So she moved to Palermo for the rest of her life. And unfortunately, towards the end, she lived to be 93, she started losing her eyesight. But they say that she was a great patron of the arts, and she funded younger artists and helped develop their careers. And in that vein, Anthony Van Dyck came down from the north and sought her out. And he painted this portrait of her on the right. He said that he gleaned more about the true principles of painting from his conversations with Sofonisba than anything else in his life. And he remembered her as an influential artist and an amazing teacher. And even as she was 92, she was incredibly sharp in her mind. Unfortunately, there was a fire in Spain at the palace, Alcazar, in 1734, and a lot of Sofonisba's painting, you can change it. A lot of Sofonisba's paintings were burned. So if you want to learn more, there's these couple places. There's a great Art Curious podcast. There's Smart History. I was kind of inspired as well by the National Museum of Women's Arts Blog Challenge. Can you name 5 women artists? And I'm hoping by the end of this year, by the end of November, I'm going to be able to name 10 new ones. So Sofonisba is strong, passionate. She worked with a dream. She had to make, I find it very interesting how women artists have to make creative decisions and with their career, like working at getting room and board and gifts, and your life living in a royal palace is one thing. It's not, but there's trade-offs for it all, right? Today we have like equal access to getting education in the art field, and hopefully equal access in the galleries. Though it's not quite like that, but 5 years ago we didn't. And I'm just glad to know about another artist during when I studied the Renaissance. It's those big, 3 or 4 guys. And I'm just glad to have a female there, put in context, that's working, painting her family, whatever she's doing, and, practicing as a professional artist. So like I said, I also have this 20-page zine on my website, tillystudio.com, if you want to learn more. It's part of how I'm teaching myself by writing and talking about it. And thank you so much for listening. One more slide, I think. Bibiana? Yes. I want to just tell you that next month, it's going to be about Rosalba Carriera. Now, she's actually known as Rosalba. Forget the last name. She was up there with Michelangelo, Leonardo. You didn't need a last name when you were talking about Rosalba. So I can't wait to share you about her. Now, if you have questions or anything, I would love to hear them. Otherwise, I really appreciate the time and that you've taken to join me tonight and to learn about this new artist. Thank you. Okay.
Well, thank you, Tilly.
Thank you.
I bring some of the people that in our studio audience, and maybe they would like to ask you some questions.
I think, Michael, you had a question.
Oh, yes. Can you hear?
Yes.
I just want just brought, you did a beautiful job there, and thank you for that. But just wondering, in today's an artist of today, a female artist of today, who comes to mind to you quickly that say would be still at working that hillside with the boulder in front of her, same kind of male dominated, up against that male dominated art world.
So
Does that make sense?
Yes, but you're asking me if there's an artist today, and yes, there's about all of us. Yeah, I would say.
Well, that's a good answer. So, okay.
I would. I mean, yes, I think there's still obstacles, but there was this recent show at the Whitechapel Gallery. Katie Hessel was writing about it. Katie Hessel has written this book that's really fantastic. It's a textbook, and it's called The History of Art, and very pale. It says Without Men, okay? But she also writes, she's the Great Women Artists podcast, and she writes reviews. And the White Castle show had this all-women show, and many of the tags or the display text referenced whether they were husbands, friends, or wives. I mean, whether the husband, what was the relation to the men, muses, wives, or friends of a male artist. It would mention it. Whereas if we saw a show of the male artist, it probably didn't mention the women there. So, but that said, look what I just did with Sofonisba. I had to tell you about Van Dyck. I had to tell you about Leonardo. I had to tell you about Vasari. It's kind of the way the landscape is in some ways too. So, but we work with it and around it. And
thank you.
Oh, thank you, Leonie, too. And I saw Phyllis was fascinating. Phyllis was in that same book club with me. So she, Phyllis, it wasn't difficult to find the information. It was fun. It was a lot of fun. You're just digging down rabbit holes. In fact, if I'm going to do this once a month, I'm going to have to really be careful. I don't do too much. That's why I had to do a book in addition to this talk, because I could go, there's just so much. And just learning about chess. I mean, did you guys know about the Italians changing the chessboard? So anyway, thank you. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Lana. I didn't know you'd make it, but thank you for coming. So thank you, everybody. And next, you'll love Rosalba. The name of the books on these artists was The Mirror and the Palette was the book we read at the beginning. Jennifer Higgy, I think her name is. And it's 25 artists and who specialize in self-portraits, really. And now on this program that I'm going to do, not all of them are from here, but I'm taking a few more from here. But I'm also, I'm just picking artists I want to learn more about. So, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
I also think it's fascinating. She lived up to 93 years old. In that time.
Yeah, and the stuff that has survived of hers is amazing. They're finding more and more. Unfortunately, things got burnt or lost, or she didn't sign them, and maybe other people signed them, but we'll find them, I think, if we really want to dig. So.
Well, thank you, Tilly. Thanks everybody for watching.
Wonderful.
And tune in on March 22.
Yes,
we'll be there.
The last Wednesday of each month.
The fourth Wednesday of each month.
Right. And Tilly will present.
And I promise to keep them short like this, so you can go away But if anybody knows anything more about any of these artists, I'd love to reach out and let me know. And thank you for the Inspiration Art Group. It's a great Viviana. You keep bringing such wonderful stuff here. I'm glad to be part of it.
Bravo.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Tilly.